Thank you very much for joining us. I wanted to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Today we're here to discuss a topic that I'm really passionate about, so thank you very much for coming. I've always wanted to talk about, where are we at the moment, where are we going, what's the future for all of us. I really wanted to see a little show of hands of who is actually in our audience. Who works in programming on the arts side? Great. Who works in marketing and PR? Interesting. And who works in media? That's such a cool mix of audience. It's really good. It's really good to see. I'm really delighted to welcome our incredible panel just to hear what their point of view is on this topic. Tonight they're hosted by the wonderful artist and producer David Williams. Thank you very much. And on our panel we have Steph Harman from The Guardian. She's the culture editor of The Guardian, and she was also the founding editor of Junkie and the editor of The Brag. Elissa Blake is a freelance arts journalist with 20 years experience. She writes for the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, The Sun Herald, and she was previously editor of the Rolling Stone. Kate Edwards, like our other panelists, has had about 6 people's worth of work in a very short amount of time. She's founded and led a host of organizations, including content and strategy company Contented, an art and music business called Fostered, and most recently a short-form content network aimed at 13 to 30-year-olds called Snackable TV. So please, let's
Thanks, Tina, and welcome everyone to tonight's panel, which I think will be great. Just to start off, so Tina's given us a bit of an introduction to who you are and some summary of your backgrounds, but each of you have a very different perspective on the title of tonight's seminar. The rather ominously framed, is arts journalism dying? Dying, not dead. And in the age of zombies, potentially able to rise and create something new.
The phoenix will rise.
But the phoenix will rise, yes, indeed. So I just to expand a bit on your perspective, based on your recent history, just get each of you to in a couple of minutes just describe where have you come from in terms of this issue. What's your perspective on it, and what do you think the state of play is now? In just a couple of minutes, maybe starting with Elissa.
Yeah, okay, so I'm a freelance journalist working for the Sydney Morning Herald, so I'm not actually on staff. I am paid by the word, so I'm commissioned one story at a time. So they've been commissioning me for a long time, and I'm grateful for that, but it's worth knowing that there's no guarantees there, that I'm not on a retainer or any kind of commitment between myself and the Sydney Morning Herald. I hope that it continues, but the future is just very uncertain. So you probably know that Fairfax went on strike in May, and the arts community happily really got behind the arts journalists who were facing redundancies, and we had started a Save the Arts campaign on social media, and for those of us who work in the arts, it was really heartening to see the whole sector kind of get behind the journalists. However, it did not change the company's mind, and there have been devastating losses in the arts at the Sydney Morning Herald and at The Age. So to put it in context, well, the bigger picture context is that 3,000 journalists have lost their jobs in the last 5 years in this country. But in the arts, 10 years ago at the Sydney Morning Herald, there was an entire arts desk. A whole part of the building was for arts. And there was an arts editor, a deputy editor, a sub-editor, specialist photographers. There was a full-time dance writer, did nothing but dance, full-time theatre writer, there were three theatre critics, full-time music writers, full-time film writers, and 2 or 3 sort of feature writers that could work across the whole sector. So there was about 12 people full-time working in the arts at the Herald. Now there are 3. So there's an arts editor and 2 reporters who are Linda Morris has a specialty in books, and Gary Maddox, who has a specialty in film. There's nobody on staff that has a specialty in performing arts. We still have Spectrum, so I want to say the good news. We still have good things. Spectrum is still there, and it has a new editor starting, Shona Martin. She also has a specialty in books. She's coming from the book publishing industry. She's also been a journalist. So Spectrum is still there. The arts pages are still there. Shortlist has been a personal loss for me because they made a decision to have Shortlist edited from Melbourne and to have shared copy between The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, which meant there could be no local art stories for either city. So it means that they're covering film and television and music, but no local performing arts for Sydney or Melbourne. I was using Shortlist as a way to cover the indie theatre scene in Sydney. Every Friday there was an indie story. They're all gone now. That was 50 a year. So that is a loss that's gone that we can't really fix. But I've tried to get some of those indie stories into arts, and happily the arts editor is taking a risk on running some smaller stories. But I think in summary, it's really that there are far fewer journalists literally in the building to phone up or email. So if your company has an in-house publicist, there's just far few actual bodies to ring or email or to get in touch with, and the paper is still adjusting how it's going to handle those changes. So that situation's unfolding.
Okay, so that's a pretty grim picture of a contemporary state of play, both as a labour market and as a kind of sector, and that's replicated in other sectors across communications and media, of course. It's not just an arts issue.
Correct.
As you guys were discussing earlier. Steph, from your perspective, what's been your journey through the changing landscape to this point in time?
So I've had a weird trajectory. I started in print as the editor of a music and arts local street press, which is The Brag, and then founded Junkie, which was a national digital youth pop culture and politics site, and then came onto The Guardian about 2 years ago. The Guardian Australia launched, I think, around 5 years ago. We're about 5 years old now. And I think my experience of talking to people in this industry about the Guardian's art section is, we're trying our hardest, but everybody really was excited about The Guardian coming to Australia because of its extremely large and fantastic reputation in arts coverage. And in Australia, we are working with very depleted resources. So when Alyssa talks about a desk of 3 to cover Sydney, we have a desk of 2 to cover the whole country. And it's challenging. So that's the arts in general. That is performing arts, that's TV, that's film, that's books, that's music, that's everything. And we've got a freelance budget, which is very small, and we've got a few excellent columnists. We have a fantastic array of critics, but that comes out of our freelance budget. And when you're working at a national publication, as Alyssa highlighted, it's really difficult for an editor to justify a lot of local stories. So for independent local theatre that isn't getting a national run, it's really difficult for me to say, is this a good enough story that it is relevant to our entire national readership? There's very, very rare cases where that occurs. And it's been interesting. I have a lot of conversations with a lot of publicists who are still trying to get their heads around that. And I think the loss of the local papers, the loss of the local Fairfax art sections has been really overwhelming. And unfortunately, it's not something that we can fill as a national publication yet, but we're feeling it as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, not great, it's
not
terrible.
great.
But a good answer. And for yourself, Kate, obviously you're working in media in a different way. You're not a print person, or in the print legacy?
No, so Steph and I actually worked together minutely on The Brag like a million years ago, where I was running a group of companies, but never actually in print per se. I think my viewpoint is probably quite different to the girls in that I probably represent the new era of digital evolution or revolution in that the entire industry of media, regardless of whether it's print or television, or whether it's even what we now call, digital, or used to be called tech, or used to be called the internet, or could be called social, is this democratization of message means that, big stoic companies that used to have, the print publications, whether they be Sydney-based or Melbourne-based or even hyper-locally based, don't need to exist because consumers are actually driving the demand. So we're at a very different place to, I suppose, both of you, in that we've started a broadcast network for 13 to 30-year-olds that squarely is looking at entertainment, arts and culture. So we've started a broadcast network off the back of research that we know 13 to 30-year-olds, advertisers call them millennials. It's a horrible, filthy term. Millennials.
Oh, millennials. Yeah.
Millennials.
I thought you had another word for that.
No,
I was like,
horrible. But young people, we've created an aggregate place for video content that sits in an ad-free environment where you can watch short-form content. So, we're probably one of the new places that have popped up because some of the old places are potentially closing. I wouldn't say that we're a replacement. We're video, we're not print. We're not always critical. We do a lot of profile, not as much critical stuff as we were talking about before. We will be going into more critical stuff. But I think that, if you overarchingly look at all of media, you go, is Channel 7 winning? No, they're not. They're in double-digit decline in profits every quarter, and they slide it under the mat all the time. Channel 10 just got bought out by CBS, I would argue, for no money because they're in massive debt. So now a massive international player has come in only as at today to buy out one of our only 3 commercial networks for a reason, because you guys aren't watching television, and I'd argue many of you aren't buying papers. I'd argue many of you don't probably buy subscriptions to these guys. And that, money talks, bullshit walks. If you're going to watch stuff in other environments, or you're going to use other environments to find out your information, if you're going to go to someone's blog post or you're going to go to someone's social media account, then don't have your hand up, narc up about these guys not having resource. So, we, the collective we, are actually both the poison chalice and the problem. We're the reason that these things don't exist as they used to. We want to have technology in the palm of our hand. We want to have things available when we ask for them to be available. We want to be able to Google how the first night at that play went last night, 1 minute after they've come off stage and the curtain's been called. So guess what? It ain't going to be these guys. So it is going to be someone who is, possibly not a very good writer, who is, horribly skewed, who isn't a great critic, and who's just blog posting from their, pissed on their red wine, blog posting from their seat. But don't expect more than what you're going to get either. I think therein lies a totally different conversation. So, I would reposition the question, is it dying? Certainly not. Have we democratised it and possibly made it a bit shitter by having things like social media? Yes. What's the solution though? Like, is there an aggregate solution? We were talking about it really briefly. Is there an aggregate solution to all the stuff where, the groups of amazing companies that you guys represent, or, playwrights and directors get together? I'm part of directors groups within film and television who we share each other's work, and we're closed groups on Facebook, but we're part of the reason why these things aren't working, because I'm seeing reviews of my friends that are directors in my private Facebook group of 10,000 people. I'm not going to The Guardian to see the review of the show from the night before because I'm getting it from a trusted source that is a closed group. So I would say that our behaviour is somewhat driving this massive change, and it is an evolutionary change. Like, we're working with UNSW at the moment, who are talking about, the skill sets of our thumbs. Like, we're doing a research paper, which is completely ridiculous, but fabulous at the same time, around young people and how they use their phones. And so this is like going to be this part of your arm, and up your arm is actually going to be the strongest part of your body in the next 5 years. So things like that, we're actually evolutionarily changing the format of our physical being because of the way that we are consuming.
in terms of evolution, I wouldn't go Lamarckian on that.
Quite yet.
But I do remember when, speaking of technology, I do remember the Nokia 3320 was a thumb-based texting, and certainly hypermobile thumbs were an absolute advantage there. iPhones tend to be fingers for me, but that's. But it is like in terms of the immediate response question. I remember doing a lot of touring theatre. I still do, but I remember when the local papers were much stronger. I do remember in regional centres getting next day reviews, like getting in print media, in the Hobart Mercury, getting a review the next day from a show that was last night. And so there was capacity for the print media to do that.
Yep.
I mean, it's not instantaneous, but it's effectively instantaneous. So I guess in the hollowing out of the staff structure of the old media, the print media, has disabled some of the process. But I guess the more traditional media organisations are catching up to some of the opportunities offered by what you're describing, Kate. Is that true?
Look, I certainly think so. From our perspective, we come up against the big guys of the world, the Newses, the Fairfaxes, the Sevens, the Nines, the Tens, in pitch battles against editorial and brand work all the time. And I think the big challenge, and you guys will be able to talk to this, is that they seem to be trying to make brands pay for it. So they go, I don't have enough money because we're trying to make sure our resource looks really good on a P&L to our shareholders. So in order to get that story or those types of stories out, yes, we know our audience wants it, but that's going to cost $100,000 or $200,000. Who could pay for that? And they try and go to a brand to have that paid for, we've seemed to find, certainly in the landscape that we work in.
We don't do that.
We got asked by a Fairfax publication only 2 weeks ago to pay for a journalist to come down to cover an editorial.
Oh, we absolutely get for mills. We don't actually have a travel budget at the arts section of the Guardian, so which is a whole other kettle of fish, and that's troubling,
Particularly when you're trying to do national coverage.
Yeah. It's huge. I mean, we can argue for it. There is a budget that exists, and I can pitch for it. But it's not something that's readily available, so that becomes obviously a huge issue.
How are you expected to do that then? Am I asking you a dumb question?
Well, no, you're expected to have freelance writers that are already in different cities. So we've got a lot of incredible freelance writers in different cities. But if we want to send someone to something, then that's a big ask.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So if there's an event somewhere that's not Sydney, Melbourne, maybe Brisbane. Maybe Perth, maybe Adelaide.
Yeah.
The pool of instantly available quality talent is thin from your perspective.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, it's a problem definitely, and it would be a problem. I do think that we still have to continue. People need to keep remembering that. Well, I need to keep remembering that the Guardian's audience is national, and every story that is very local needs to have a really national angle in order for it to fly with The Guardian. So it does sound like a big loss that we can't cover everything that's happening in every small town, but at the same time, it's not really right for our audience anyway. We're all coming from very different media backgrounds, and we have very different audiences as well. So,
from your perspective?
Yeah, look, so because I'm not on staff, I'm not fully across all of the paid content that Fairfax is doing, but they are absolutely doing it, asking for branded content, so where somebody's paid. I have written some of that work myself with where there is a commercial editor who is a journalist who will ask me to write a piece of journalism about the MCA's new exhibition or about the Art Gallery of New South Wales' new exhibition, and I will write it as I would write any other story, but the Art Gallery of New South Wales has paid for it. They haven't paid me, they've paid the company, and that might go on a wraparound on the outside of the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, so you've probably seen quite a bit of that. And I've been writing quite a lot of that. I'm okay with that kind of writing. It's paid work for arts journalists, so I'm all right with that, and I still keep it pure. But what I worry about is that the arts is having to fight in an environment where if there's no advertising, you don't get a story, or if there's no marketing money put in, you don't get a story. So there's become an uneven playing field where you can have 8 pages of sport and no one has to put money in at all. But for arts, they will say, well, where's your advertising? And the arts journalism is having to justify itself with the advertising. So if the arts sector pulls their advertising out, then those sections will go down. So it's...
And conversely, where I work at the Seymour Centre, we've had internal discussions around, do we buy an ad? Well, we'll only buy an ad if we know we're going to get a story, and if we don't know we're going to get a story, then why would we buy an ad? So it is uncertainty at both ends of that question.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem with shrinking space. Like when there was more space, probably more people got a story.
Yep.
But now that space, we're having to fight tooth and nail, it's just becoming really fraught who gets a story and who doesn't get a story.
Which is interesting because the space on the internet is unlimited. So, I mean, I was reading, Alison Croggan wrote a really fantastic piece about this towards the end of last year about the fact that Australia in general, like this problem is beyond arts journalism. This is a problem with the way that the Australian people and the Australian government specifically is devaluing an industry that actually contributes more to the GDP than any other, pretty much. And arts journalists are, the death of arts journalism is one part of that. And she said in the piece about how even online outlets like The Guardian still enforce word limits, which is really interesting kind of, we definitely do have, like, I say, 700 to 900 would be great. We don't really enforce it, but it is an interesting thing to consider when we talk about the lack of space. That's not necessarily the issue when most people are reading stuff online. I think one of the big issues is your newspaper that has been a newspaper forever. Does it have the tools? Has it evolved quickly enough to know how to sell its offline stories on the internet? And I think in the case of a lot of arts journalism, the answer is no. Like, I see a lot of arts journalism that's sold so poorly online, and it could be a fantastic piece, but there's nothing in the headline, there's nothing in the image, there's nothing in the Facebook sell that actually proves that. So, I mean, that's a problem that's kind of irrelevant to you guys. It's something that bugs me from my side, but...
I think part of the legacy of that, of space, is budget, of course.
Yes, and it all comes to budget.
So when journalists are paid by the word, they will give you word limits. But if we shake that model up and we're no longer paid by the word, we're paid by a set rate or another way, maybe that business about how long it is could change. But certainly the internet has unlimited space, but companies like Fairfax do not have unlimited budgets, and neither does The Guardian.
No.
So why can't we write a story about every show in town? Because the journalists have to be paid and the photographers have to be paid. So that would bring up what is popping up is many, many bloggers who are doing it for zero money. And although I applaud more voices and more passion and more people writing about the arts, we've seen over the last 10 years that this is unsustainable, that people can't write for no money for years and years and years. You get burnt out. It's financially not sustainable, it's emotionally not sustainable. So relying on many, many bloggers is going to be a problem. And the same with new outlets that have very tiny budgets. Even big companies have really tiny budgets. What it means is the arts journalists are just going to go get better jobs. They're going to all go to the university sector and get paid, a good amount of money.
Which is also contracting, just...
But seriously, many, many ex-Fairfax journalists have gone into the university sector because the skills cross over. And so if you're a redundant journalist and then you try to make a living as a freelancer, but you only get paid $150 for an article, you might last 3 or 4 or 6 months, and then you're going to go, I think I might go get a real job.
And then what the consequence of that is, obviously...
There's a loss of knowledge.
We lose all of our experts. We lose people who have been following playwrights, who've been following directors for their entire career and can compare one latest play to their first play and understand where they're going with it, which... I mean, okay, so we can ask another question about what is the value of that kind of criticism? Is that value to the audience or is it to the arts? Or is it intertwined, which is what I would argue?
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest question, though, is how do you value it? And if people aren't buying it, or if the value from whether it's Fairfax or The Guardian or whoever is commissioning the piece is that they only put $150 on it, it's up to the entire industry in its entirety to better value that.
Yes.
Otherwise, there is no value, because the value, you don't go and buy a brand new Toyota car for $5. the market tells you what the value is. So if the market is so shit in journalism, then we need to work on a better value system or better value proposition. And you know, I hate dancing the game of social media, but you know, there are things that are much more delineated in audiences that are far better than eyeballs. Impressions can be bought, robots can be put onto anything that you need these days, but engagement scores are engagement scores, and if somebody sits on your article for 3 minutes and reads it end to end, you know if they've read it. Like those things, I've got a web portal that does 150,000 unique young people a month, and I can tell you exactly when they stop watching the video. At the second. Not even at the second, at the frame.
Well, and that's
so
another
that
thing
is available.
Yeah, I mean, The Guardian has this insane ability to like read how far people are scrolling, and so when arts journalists say, "Oh, but I want to write 2,000 words," I'm like, "Oh, well, our data tells you that you really have to get to the point sooner than that."
Episodic content.
Which is a shame, and it's absolutely, that's specific to our outlet, and I always bend the rules when it's something that justifies the word length. But there are other outlets that obviously
Write a book.
deserve to have long form as well. But I think, I think that idea of metrics is a really interesting one. I think news journalists, because news journalism and news editors have been trying forever to understand and to reframe the metrics, and because as journalists we want to publish stuff that's important regardless of how many people click on it. So we try to bend how we measure it. Oh, well, yes, not many people read the review, but people read all the way to the end of the review, and the review counts because it's contributing to culture. And these are all conversations that we're having.
But is it contributing to culture if no one reads it?
Well, that's,
it's like
I would say...
If a tree falls down in the woods and no one sees it or hears it, it didn't fall down, did
Even though it's recorded in the National Library and it may be remembered in a book in 20 years.
Perhaps.
No, it's a question worth asking that I don't think many people have answered in a compelling enough way to convince the industry to change yet.
I agree. And I think that's why this conversation, I think, and these sorts of conversations are extremely important, because it re-evaluates not only its commodity. You know, if you're being charged out at a per word rate, you're being charged out as a commodity, and that's a really different. That's a fee-for-service rate. That's no longer employment. That's a gig-based economy. That changes employment stats. That changes people in full-time careers. That changes superannuation. That changes aged care. That changes government remit from here to here.
Which interestingly, sorry to interrupt, but it interestingly puts arts journalists in the same place as artists.
Correct.
Which I think is a fascinating turning of the
duplicity,
table. Oh, duplicity, maybe?
Yeah.
Doubling, sorry,
yeah.
Flow.
No, I think, look, I totally agree with you. You know, one of the companies that my husband and I own together is an artist management business, and we're, you know, on that front constantly struggling. We use our own platform to profile our artists because there are no other platforms to profile our artists. You know, we've got amazing, young, emerging talent. We've got, you know, well-heeled, won every award known to man, can't get an article written about them when they get, you know, massive consulate prizes from the British Academy of Excellence, and no one will write about it because it's up against the 450 other things that you guys have got on your plate. So we've started dedicating space to them because it's important. So I totally get that argument as well. There's no, I don't think that there is actually a right answer, but, you know, it is the arts and artists, or the arts and journalists, they are all actually, I think, now one and the same. And for media, they don't actually care about the art. Having come from a media background, to be really clear, they could not give a shit. They, in my opinion, they are running the block 7 nights a week if they can. They run strip shows. As long as the ads keep coming in, they will keep making banal crap. And keep putting it out. So that state of the market is not going to change unless other things do. You know, we've got a really big remit to have what we call a makers market. So we buoy up young filmmakers. We've taken a bunch of AFTRA students on board. You know, they actually cost us a lot of money because they're really green, they don't really know what they're doing, but we you know, from our perspective, it's about making sure that the next generation of makers come through and actually still keep making. Because if there aren't any makers, as far as I'm concerned, if there is no art, there is no world. Art does really change the world. So if we don't have anyone that's coming through that sees this as a reasonable way to make money, and that they want to pursue this as a career, then we're in a lot of trouble. Like, I want my 2-year-old to go, Mum, I want to be a painter, and for me to go, that is an awesome idea. Not, fuck, how are you going to pay the rent? Or, Mum, I want to be a journalist, and I want to work in the arts. I want to be able to say, that's a really great opportunity for you. Not, you're getting paid by the word. I think that that's really horrible.
It's been normal for a long time.
Yeah.
Being paid, but
Being paid by the word is actually a luxury.
well, I mean, but part of the legacy of that is that
It's not a luxury. I just meant a lot of people get paid a very small
So
amount.
there have been staff writers who've been paid salaries, but the major media are trying to shift everybody out to be a freelance model, so that everyone's a freelancer now. So then you don't have to pay superannuation or holiday pay or any of those things.
They're not on the P&L.
Yeah,
They don't exist.
That's right. So then we only have freelancers. But if the freelance rates are going to be so devastatingly low, we're definitely going to lose those writers. So yes, it does come to the point where freelance writers become like artists, and freelance writers can be going to government bodies asking for funding like an artist.
Yep.
And maybe the government needs to step up and give us that funding so that we can continue to write the kind of works we do for the whole sector and for all of the audiences.
And certainly some arts journalists are making that argument, as Alison Croggan and
Yes.
Robert Reed's Project Witness is doing. They're
Correct.
about to launch something.
Yes.
So it's just an interesting state of affairs when we're all in the same boat. There was this sense that arts media was somehow safer than the art that it was writing about, but it's fascinating that
Well, I think
it's not the case.
some elements of it are. I think entertainment, arts media, like TV coverage,
Mm.
reality TV,
Movies.
national arts.
They all come
Recaps.
with budgets, though.
Well, I mean, I pay the same for I would pay the same for a TV recap as I would for another review. So from my perspective, they pay the same, but one of them gets 100,000 views, and a review of a local theatre production will be lucky to crack 5,000. And that to me is the real tension as an editor, where you're like, how can I justify it? Well, okay, it's a good story, it's something that's worth us covering. There's many reasons that I can justify it, but you also have to do the other thing. And that's the consistent conversation that happens in my head is.
So perhaps we can't rely on the major mainstream outlets anymore for deep coverage, and that we need to start specialist sites, dedicated sites like you're talking about, for specialist coverage. And maybe we need to change the way we measure things so that we're not thinking it's only worthwhile if it gets 100,000 hits, because otherwise the arts just becomes television.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing that at Fairfax, that if it's a story about Game of Thrones, it gets a really big splash. Or if it's a very big art story like the Archibald Prize, it will get a very big splash. But if it's even a main stage Belvoir show won't get as much coverage as a Game of Thrones show will. So if you're measuring it on clicks, if that's our new measure,
Well, it's
then
not.
it's going to be television.
I think that's the reason why we need to change the measure as well.
That's
I mean, I
right.
think
Yeah.
editors have always, forever, this isn't new, they've always said, is it the public's interest or is it in the public's interest? Like, is the public interested in it versus the public interest?
Yeah.
That's like from back when I was studying at Sydney Uni, that was always the tension, and there's nothing new with that.
And in terms of the question of what could we do about this, I do remember, Alyssa, you promoting a campaign maybe a year and a half ago about encouraging people to click on art stories to increase the metrics of that, rather than people photocopying it and sharing it around their friends, but actually click on it actively through multiple devices, so you can still get in for free, just to keep the metrics up, to keep to keep the Bing counters happy.
Yeah, that didn't work.
Oh.
But it seemed like a good idea. When we discovered that the arts was being measured by how many people clicked on it, I thought, oh my God, we have to tell everyone to click on it. Like, don't just, you'll see it on Facebook and you can like it. Liking it isn't enough.
No.
You have to click through and actually
So it counts.
behave like you read it. And then maybe share it with somebody and ask them to click on it. But they can like it because, oh, I like that person, or I like that Belvoir show, and that's a nice photo, I've liked it. Liking it is not enough. However, the really tricky thing at Fairfax is that you can't even find the arts on their websites. So how can you even click on it? So on the phone, they haven't loaded art stories on their phone homepage at all.
At all.
It's not there at all.
And it's not even on the little tab when you push
You have
it.
to search somebody's byline, so you have
Yeah.
to know that it might be there. So then on
Not
the,
even on the little stripy thing up in the corner.
the little hamburger,
Yeah,
it's not there.
it's not there.
And then on the website, it's way down, and it has been reduced to a tiny strip, the arts, underneath entertainment. So entertainment is being promoted, but the arts is being demoted. And then we've only noticed today that Fairfax is remodelling all of their websites, and they've already put up what it looks like for the Brisbane Times. So you can see this is what the new design will look like, and the arts isn't there at all. So we're feeling like, oh, we're getting the message that the arts isn't there to be promoted, to be clicked on, to be shared. It's not considered important.
So the reason, I mean, this is a horrible devil's advocate position to play, and is not how I feel about the arts, obviously.
We'll slay you later.
But the reason is that more people are clicking on the other stuff, and that's why the front page editor isn't putting that stuff above the fold, which is above the scroll, you know. So what do we? I mean, we need to stop. I mean, I don't think that this was the intent of that campaign, but we need to kind of stop manufacturing interest in the arts and start making the arts more interesting. If the goal is really to get more people reading it.
Yeah.
I would argue that I know that a lot of people put up their hand saying that they were PR, so please feel free to burn me at the stake later. I would argue though that promo and PR are the most useful tool that something like, if you look at film and television have. They have really shit hot PR and promos. They have really great assets. They have really great publicists that have been doing it for 20 and 30 years. They know everybody. I know because we get absolutely hammered by film PR at Snackable. I would get 45 emails a week from the PRs. Have you seen the trailer? Have you seen the trailer? Here's another one. Have you seen the trailer? Have you seen the trailer? Here's another one. Would you like a junket? Here's a trailer. Here's a trailer. Here's a trailer. Oh my God, please stop emailing me. I get the message. I get nothing from the arts. I get nothing. We put things out via everything from Screen Australia, through to arts, through these guys, through Sydney Festival, you name it. And we don't get a hell of a lot from the arts. So I would say that the arts holistically, and this isn't any, pointing blame at anyone, needs a really good publicist and some really good promo and some really good ways to advocate for arts, full stop. So there are things like, for us at Snackable, and this is an anecdotal example, we did the Catch bus trial. We made no money out of it. We didn't get any money out of it. It cost us a lot of time and head hours and heartache to be a part of that. But what it did, it got our product into the buses and onto every single kid's phone that caught one of those Catch buses to trial Snackable before we'd launched. So we got real-time testing. We got it in the hand of the consumer that I wanted my product to be in the hand of. I would argue that the people that read the arts sections of the paper...
Stop sneering when you say that.
No, but I love it, and I feel quite passionate about it. So I would argue that the people that would read the art sections would be well-heeled. I would argue that they would be part of, the media outlets that own all of the lift banks in the city. So why isn't arts or the arts or PR or the journalists going to those people and saying, can we put our stories, can we aggregate? And that's the one great thing about digital is you can aggregate your data, you can aggregate your stories, you can aggregate your bylines and get a much greater reach to your clickability, get other people to help you get more clicks. I would say that that's a very basic level for today's conversation. Obviously, there's a lot more detail that goes into those sorts of things. But, I would argue that arts is super relevant. I would argue that certainly for my target market being under 30, it's probably more relevant than it is for 30 to 50. Our research shows that entertainment and the arts is number one for 13 to 17-year-olds currently in Australia. So there is a market about to explode that isn't getting enough content for this area because it's shutting down or because it's got budget restrictions. So then how, to throw to you guys, how does an army of people that are obviously all interested in this, activate around a common cause to make sure that that audience that is fervently excited by the arts receives that message?
I would imagine that it's always dangerous to say I don't get contacted by the arts
I know.
because that will backfire on you.
I was thinking as it was coming out,
Yeah.
Kate, shut up. Kate, shut up.
Her Twitter handle's up there if you want to
Please annoy me later.
direct message. I guess I'm interested that you say that your target market, there isn't content for them, and they want it, and there isn't content from the more traditional media platforms.
It's digital litter. Look at what if you're 13 to 17, what are you watching? Tell me, what are you watching? What are you doing?
I'm 42, I don't really remember what it was like.
No, but this is what I'm saying. So we go regress. Go take you back. 13 to 17, I was flicking through Dolly. I had magazines. Blah, don't exist. I was watching a whole bunch of what was quite PG, Steve Urkel type, well-produced American and Australian comedies and sitcom. Don't exist anymore. So what do they do? So yes, they have this thing called an open gate, and it's called social media, which means they do this. And there's just shit on there. It's digital. We call it digital litter in our office, and we're against it entirely because it's poorly written, it's poorly shot, it's poorly thought out, it's bad creative, and usually it's just rubbish. It's rubbish that you waste 2 hours of your life going down a rabbit hole, and you wake up 2 hours later and go, oh, I could have read a book, or I could have drawn a picture, or I could have sat outside in the sun. And we all do it, even if we're older and not 13 to 17. I would argue, though, that kids that are growing up with that now are actually going to choose not to have that in the future. Because I think it's very boring. I think it's very one-dimensional. I think that they feel, certainly the young people that we've done research with, I think they feel very anxious by the world of social media. I think it has far more negative effects in their world at 13 to 17 than it has positives, and they're not actually getting any good content out of it. So, you know, for us, we created a business, we created a network targeting 13 to 30s, but with a really cold, hard look at 13 to 17, because we realised there wasn't anything for them anymore. We just went, oh, they're social. Social what? Like uni-lad pranks that kids are falling downstairs? Like, there's only so many you can watch, right? Like, kids aren't dumb. They didn't get dumber. And if you want, I've got a 2-year-old, I don't want him to be stupid. I don't want him to watch pranks all day. I would like him to have a well-rounded education. But if we just allow them to just watch social, I argue that they're all going to be quite stupid.
Okay, so arts journalism of the future as an intervention to
well, not
make us
necessarily as
better.
an intervention, but I think, you know, I talk, you know, in my silly, humorous way, because I try and make it anecdotally a safe place to talk about stuff that is actually quite scary. Media is really scary. AI is really scary. It's going to get a lot more scary for everybody. We're at the tipping point of what some of that stuff looks like. We will be fully AI by the time we get to the States in January. We're moving Snackable to the US as part of a very large push that we've got to be a global organisation. Shit will get real, and it's only going to get realer. This conversation is still, even with me on the panel and with you guys working in what I would argue is now digital, not print, you know, this is still a very analogue conversation. If we were in a technology-filled room with some of the people that we work with on a daily basis, they'd be like, what the actual F are you talking about? Like, this is so analogue. This is so 1999. They're looking to the future where you will walk into your house and you will say, I want the critical review of show X, and a box will speak it to you. So, you know, the world isn't going to continue to look like this for very long. And I think that we've got to be ready for it.
I think that what you're saying is right, and that the changes in technology are right, but I still believe that there needs to be an arts journalist to make that content. When you walk into your house and say, I want that review, someone still has to write it, and it still has to sit on a platform of some kind. So, and maybe we need arts journalism more in this new age of digital, that we need people who can make things by hand and that are crafted and that are careful and that is not thrown up in 20 seconds or no one's in a wild panic that who's going to be first with this. That if we can take a little step back and create good quality content, I think that would be a step in the right direction. But I think that it's going to take all of us to do it, in that if we've relied on commercial outlets that were television stations or newspapers to do this for us, and those platforms are looking very shaky, I really believe the entire arts sector has to pull together and invest in this kind of writing. If you value it...
And I don't think that it can just be just writing. I think that
Yes.
the big...
Yes. all of it,
Yeah.
videos, all of it, podcasts, and whatever comes next. Making of these kinds of stories is probably a better word. The making of stories about art needs to be valued. Probably it's most valued by all of you in the arts sector. And then can we all remember the audiences, which
Yeah.
is who it's for.
Yeah.
So if we can keep our eyes on what are the audiences or the readers, how can we serve them? How can we invest in it? How can we ask the government to help? How can we get the philanthropists on board? How can we all pull together rather than becoming increasingly fractured, which is kind of where we're at the moment.
I'd argue that the government just gave the really, really, really large multi-million dollar rebates back to the television network. So I'd argue, why can't they give it back to the arts sector?
And
What was it, 94 million per network?
It was 30 million to Foxtel for...
Being nice
for-
today?
Yeah, for sport, which they took away from ABC to give to Foxtel to cover women's sport. But that's all part of the excitement of the current government. I guess to follow up your question, Alyssa, you say, what can we do? Do you have a sense of what we can do, or is it just to foster the conversation among the sector about solidarity as opposed to increasing siloedness?
It has to be much more than a hashtag.
Sure.
For example, that we can't all pull together with a hashtag or a feel-good campaign. It's got to be much more than that. So I have a project which I'll push for 2 minutes, but it's relevant in that I think I'm creating a website that is a specialist arts website. So where the gap is coming in the mainstream, I think we can start something for Sydney that is absolutely dedicated to the arts, that serves the audience, that is free so that people can share it on social media and it's not behind a paywall, and that it's ad-free. So we're not getting any pop-ups or rotating ads or anything, and the journalists who are working on it are professional and paid, and that they're not worrying about how many clicks they're getting so that they can tell the advertisers we had this many clicks. Because as soon as you get into that, it's a downward spiral of trying to come up with more sensational stuff so that people will click on it and then more people will advertise. That is a model. The advertising model is broken. Then there's a subscription model of asking everybody to pay $10 a month, or having a funded campaign, or have everybody pay little bits. When you ask the readers to pay, look, the research shows people don't want to subscribe. People, and especially Australians, will not subscribe. So we have to create something that's free. But in order to have a professional arts website that is serving audiences here, we need the arts sector to invest in it. We need philanthropy money, and we need the government. We need everyone to pull in. If you invested in a new model, there was editorial money that went out to the whole arts sector, something that is a third party that you can trust, I think that would be a step in the right direction.
So just to step in here, so effectively what you're asking arts organisations to do is redeploy a chunk of money that might have been previously allocated towards advertising, which would be directed at the idea of getting coverage from a print publication to a specialist publication such as what you're proposing.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It might be marketing money. It might be the money that you once spent on avant-garde could come to a new project, for example. So it's a new model. It hasn't been done before. I have started talking to Create New South Wales and the City of Sydney, who are very excited about how can we start something that's specialised for Sydney. It's not Melbourne. There's no food, there's no nightclubs, there's no what to do on the weekend. It's just the arts made by professional writers. But if the arts sector doesn't get on board and back something like this, is arts journalism dying? It will if you let it. It will if you let it, but if you invest in it and you care about it, then we can make something for audiences that will be really worthwhile. And it can be video, it can be podcasts, it can be whatever the future holds, it can be adaptable, but it's stories about art for audiences. If we can keep our minds on what are we all doing this for, because I also believe that art can change your life. And to write stories about arts that drive people into the theatres or the art galleries and have a life-changing experience is something that's extremely valuable. And it's currently not being valued by the mainstream media, but I think we can make something new.
Okay.
I have so much to say about that in terms of just managing your expectations. As somebody who sold their house and mortgaged their life to the tune of over $1.6 million to start Snackable TV, not a single dollar of federal or local funding has come our way. I have been involved in 38 rounds of funding with everybody known to man, and we have not received a dollar. We got a gratis loan that we have to pay back in full with 9.8% interest, and we have not received a dollar.
Why do you think that happened?
Because I think that they being the generic they, because we went to everybody, trust me, I wore nice shoes, I did my hair, I didn't wear a political t-shirt, I wore black, I tried to get money out of them.
Yeah.
I think because they thought that I'd do it anyway.
Right, yeah. Yes.
And I think that if there is, and I think that in our arts industry, and I'm probably going to get absolutely hamstrung for this, I think that within our arts industry and our arts sector, looking after as many artists as we do and having the platform that we do, the challenge is in that a lot of people that aren't rewarded are the ones that have the gumption to either go and try and find funding or do it themselves anyway. The ones that don't have the gumption to go and do that get the funding.
Wow, that's harsh.
It's really harsh, but it's actually really true.
But don't let that discourage you.
No, but I will happily have a wine and tell you all the things that we failed at in trying to get to that point, because we don't have ads. We don't charge subscription. We are all those things. We foster young talent. We have young directors, young filmmakers from Australia and all over the world. Not a dollar, not out of the cities, not out of Create New South Wales, not out of New South Wales, not out of federal.
I mean, the other thing is that, like, once you do it, no one's going to give you money for free, right? They're all going to want the clicks, regardless of what they say. I feel like even most major theatre companies who want reviews also still want people to read them. So it becomes about how do you share it? How do you make sure that the story? And I know that you're fantastic at doing that. So I feel like if anyone's going to be able to do it, it's you. But it is. I have faith.
It's utopian, but I think while we're in such a depressed state, a utopian model is worth considering.
Yeah, I think so too. I think,
because it's also, like you say, maybe we have to wait for all of the arts media to be completely gone. Wait another 2 years when it's all gone, then we can look around and go, what are we going to do now? Or we could start something now and have a bridge so that once it is gone, there will be something there ready. Yeah.
Or at least a domain name that you own.
At least a domain name.
Yeah. It's probably, on that note of cautious optimism, it's probably an opportunity to open the conversation to the floor. I imagine there are many burning questions or outrage that people have been bubbling away that no doubt people want to share. So does anyone have any questions for our panel at this stage? Come on, surely. Yes.
I'm just wondering, Kate, you said that you think 13 to 30-year-olds are going to turn away from like social media streams. So can you just explain a bit more about where you think they're going to go online?
Oh God, I don't have a crystal ball as to what they're going to come up with next, but certainly from the anecdotal evidence that we've got social platforms that have over 200,000 people on each individual stream, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're watching their behaviour every day. They're mainly local, so we know that more than 90% of that traffic or those likes or people that are on those channels have been cultivated since we started on the 1st of December. So it's a really big short frame sample size that are highly engaged. So you can watch. They're a really good case study, if you like. What we know is that we can't be doing the organic traffic to our socials. It's actually legitimately impossible to be doing the numbers we're doing based on the amount of likes we've got. So what that tells us, I'm not that digitally smart, trust me, I have people that do that. They tell me that what that tells us is that people are bookmarking to come to us, but not liking us because they don't want us to spam them. So that market is not liking our page. So if you actually have a look at our audience, most of our audience in social isn't 13 to 17. they're actually older than that. So there is this huge cavernous amount of people that are coming to our site. We can't be doing 14 million people a month and only have 111,000 likes on Facebook. Those numbers don't add up. They would literally have to be coming like 65 times a day. Like, it just doesn't work. So who are all these other people coming to our site, coming to our socials? So what that does tell us is that the traffic is young, because you can track on Facebook age. We know that the traffic is young, and we know that they're not liking us, that they're purposefully not liking us on Facebook, not liking us on Instagram, and are coming back because they're appointment to view when they want to come back and have a look at what we've got to say. So I can't answer your question as in where are they going to go. I know they're starting to behave differently though. Had you have told me when I was back at Foxtel, I was at the music channels at Foxtel for a number of years, had you had told me that that's the way that they would behave, I would have laughed you out of the room, because we were building complete strategies around our entire 4 music platforms, around likes and getting people to like us and isn't this going to be great, which is completely anecdotally, diametrically opposed to the way that that behaviour is now.
So you think it could be dangerous if media organisations are really focusing on their energy on existing social platforms as opposed to creating their own?
I think that the cultivation of interesting and good stories will never go wrong. Netflix is Phoenix, rising from the ashes. Many people don't know that it started in 1997 in someone's backyard in San Francisco, and only because it went into an incubator and received lots of funding out of Comcast Ventures and a bunch of other big American companies did it become the Netflix that you and I know and have known for the last 6 years. It's actually a 22-year-old business. But none of us had ever heard of it. It was a really great SVOD OTT idea thing that no one could wrap their head around. And I would argue that it has been a resurgence of video media, regardless of whether you call it television or whether you call it video or whether you call it film. They have created an entirely new marketplace for producers and directors of that sort of screen content that didn't exist before. I would argue Game of Thrones and the budgets that HBO are releasing to their new shows wouldn't exist if HBO hadn't been clicking at their heels. I would argue that people wouldn't be innovating. You look at, there's this, I'll give you one last thing to have a look at. Go to Mary Meeker's, I call it Mary Meeker's Guide to Everything. It's not called that. It's called Mary Meeker's Digital Guide to Media, and it comes out once a year. Came out in May. It's like 357 pages of data. It's quite heavy lifting. Go to the video section and go to the social section. Video section is on page 71. I know it off by heart. And goes for about 10 pages. There is a graph on, I think, page 76 that shows all of the major movie houses and film and television networks all in double-digit decline. 28%, 20th Century Fox is in like 28% or 36% decline. All of them are in their 20s, 30s and 40s. Netflix is in 6,669% growth year on year. Things are changing across the entire media landscape. It's not about arts journalism, it's not about print, it's not about online anymore. It's about people behaving differently with different devices and those devices being connected in a different way that is platform agnostic. To your idea, I think you're right. I obviously think you're right. I bet my house on that your idea was right. It's called Snackable TV, and I'm still betting my house on it.
Yeah.
I actually think that your idea and my idea of these utopian aggregate safe places where true proper craft can exist is going to be the only way forward. People will get sick of the litter. The crap is only so good for so long. Our attention spans are only so short. I spend most of my time now doing speaking events and in data, like trying to work out shit for the new evolution of this stuff. And I don't know, I don't have a silver bullet. All I can tell you is what I can see. And I can see even between when we launched on the 1st of December and today, how different the behaviour is in 8 months. And it's scary.
Other questions? Yeah, over here.
Audience development is a different thing as opposed to consuming the content. So you can write a wonderful review about a show. That next is if I was marketing Belvoir or something like that, the traditional way would be to get a review done. You would hope that therefore a couple of thousand people would read that and then a few percentage of those would turn up and buy your thing. do you think we're going to a point where we're declining audience numbers but increasing content consumption on your devices? Do you think that we're actually going to end up with something like the equivalent of production houses versus galleries or theatres?
I'll listen to your story.
I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering this correctly, but I think that word of mouth is still a massively important human thing. And that's the fourth leg of the table, that the audiences need to spread word of mouth with some kind of content to get audience development, encourage your friends or family or whatever to come along to a thing. Because if each of us goes to a play and we think to ourselves, that was quite good, but keep it to ourselves, that no one else knows about it. But if each of us uses social media to go, I saw this thing tonight and it was incredible and you should go, here's a photo or here's a video or here's something I want to share with you. If we actually do all behave in a more proactive behaviour, that's where your audience development can come from, is actually telling people to go rather than just hoping they go. I think we need to be way more aggressive about that. But I also think platforms like Facebook in particular, where probably your older audience members are thriving. I've had a big musical producer say to me, oh my God, Alyssa, just make something for Facebook because that's where all the baby boomers are and they want to buy tickets to our musical and take their grandchildren. So make something for Facebook, that's all we need. How do you get those random people is when the Facebook web spreads out, maybe your brother sees it or your cousin or your mum or someone else who doesn't normally go to the arts. And if you just share something, that's one step. But if you share it and say, I saw this, it was good for these reasons, here's my personal recommendation. Because I believe, like what you're saying with litter, that there's so much noise that people are hungry for personal recommendations where someone who's an expert or a trusted friend or a dear neighbour says, I saw it, it was good, you should take a risk. I think that kind of word of mouth is where is quite a grassroots idea of just spreading the word.
Marketing is trying to mimic that in advertising. They're paying young people to do exactly that. They're trying to mimic that because recommendation is so important. We're humans.
And because people just don't go to mastheads anymore. Like nobody accepts,
I only read this.
Like hardly anybody is typing in website.com. People are getting to your website because of a recommendation of an article from their friend. Upworthy did, back when Upworthy were relevant, I don't really know what they're doing now, but they did this amazing slideshow that was like how to make that one thing go viral. And we used to refer to it a lot when we were at Junkie, but the idea is that you're not writing your Facebook post of your article to get people to click onto your article. You're not making it for the people that like your page. You're making it for their friends, so that when the people who like your page share it, their friends want to click on, and that's how you expand your audience. And so that is all about personal recommendation and about somebody you trust. I don't know what the answer is. I particularly don't know what the answer is when it comes to really local theatre, because I think, if we talk about something like local theatre, local galleries, Snackable isn't focused on, and how do you make that stuff interesting?
Yeah, and how do you make it interesting in terms of story narrative from a video production perspective? Is a challenge I'm happy to undertake, but I would suggest it's a difficult one. I think that the arts could learn a lot from people that need to. Necessity is the mother of invention, as we all know. I recently moved to Byron Bay and don't know anyone and bought a farm. What an idiot. Fox got a chicken the other night. Regional Kate didn't deal with that very well. It's very urban still. And the first thing I did was go through Facebook and find all the groups that were in Byron Bay. So I'm now a part of Byron Bay Buy, Swap and Sell. I'm now part of the Community Notice Board. I'm now, looking for a PA up there for one of our companies. So I'm now PAs in Byron. And I'm in all these groups. And they legitimately are flogging me culture. So it's not just, hey, buy this bedhead because I'm moving, or buy this shitty combi because I'm a stinky backpacker that now wants to get rid of the shitty combi for $500. They're actually flogging me a lifestyle. And I think that that's a really interesting position. to be in, whether it's Facebook groups, whether it's the analogue version of a Facebook group. We combine together because we like for like the people that are in our friendship group or our extended group or indeed our industry. And I'd argue that perhaps there aren't very many good industry tools for audience development. Like if there was a really great Facebook or Instagram group that was all around, you know, theatre goers are us, you know, bad name, I'm obviously not creative in the room, you know, would you click on that? Because I know that from our perspective, my perspective on the fostered side, we've got heaps of street artists and they do that really well. So they've got an aggregate group called Activated Walls and it's got like 50 million followers around the world and it's Australian, and all they do is take photos of and videos of other people's great work, not tagging, proper street art from around the world, and they throw it up and people like it. Then they promote each other's work, they get more paid work, they stay in jobs. Because it's grassroots. I'd argue, again, it's, you know, relevance, time, size, audience, age, etc. But, you know, I think, again, necessity is the mother of invention, and if these things, you know, aren't in existence, there's certainly some great things that, you know, the community at large can do to start pulling those things together. You know, if Byron Bay, arguably probably the most transient city in Australia, can get their shit together enough to have a Byron Bay buy, swap and sell, I argue that the arts industry could put one together.
For sure.
And maybe Alyssa will run it.
Maybe I will.
And you can run it as part of your new venture.
Yes.
Just up the back in the kind of, yeah.
My question is, I can see how the digital sphere really serves video and film really well. Instagram is brilliant for these activated walls and so on. And theatre, to an extent, is also a visual medium that can be promoted this way. What about literature and the future of literary criticism?
Well, it's a really, really interesting question. And I think literature benefits, from my perspective, which is very limited as the culture editor of a national publication that's tied to an international, literature is one of the art forms that makes sense for us to cover because it is national, books come out nationally, whereas a very small local theatre production needs to have a real good reason. We used to do more book reviews than we do now. We really, really want to start increasing it again. We want to do more books coverage, which is good, yes. But the flip side is the same. It's the same flip side. As an editor, you've got that niggling thing: is how many people are reading it. And a book review costs a lot of money because you're paying a writer to read an entire book and then critique it. That's a lot of money out of my budget. And that niggling voice is like, if only so many people are reading it, not does it have value, but there's this certain kind of arrogance of an editor that has dissipated completely in the age of the digital world, where an editor used to be able to decide what their reader wants and just put it on the page. But now we have all this data to track what their reader really wants. And it's very arrogant as an editor to be like, yes, but they should want this. And so this is, I have no answer, I just have continuing thoughts about it. But I do think literature, I think, as with anything, if you frame a story well, if you frame a review well, if you put it online well, and if you sell it well on Facebook and on social, you can sell it, you can make it work, but it needs to be sold well.
It's interesting because The Guardian UK has very deep book coverage.
Yeah.
And they repackage it in all kinds of interesting ways.
And they do repackage as well,
Yeah.
And they do a lot more, they've got a lot more resources for repackaging. They do a lot of video stuff around books as well, good long form books, interviews, they've got podcasts, they've got everything.
Yeah. Why can't we have that here?
Well, we don't have the money,
Just
unless
like
somebody
budget-
gives us the money.
Budget again.
Yeah. But that's the thing, you know, I was thinking a while ago, what if, like, similarly to you, what if every publisher came together and put in $2,000 each to fund a book section at The Guardian? That could be a way that we do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that things like, I'm by no means an expert in this, I'm in the performing arts, but publications like the Sydney Review of Books, I'm seeing a lot more online content from the Sydney Review of Books now than I ever saw when it was a print publication, and I used to actually get it and read it, but there's opportunities in that space for literature. How about down the front?
Hi, I was just wondering what you think the role of the government should be going forward in terms of funding and funding the organisations versus your example of not being able to be funded by them at all. What's the point where they should be stepping in to do something, and is there something they can do?
Oh, such a big question.
Yeah, that is a big question.
It's like this.
With lots of vested interests.
I mean, this comes down to that debate of have we sold the arts as an imperative, and I think that we need to. I think the arts is an imperative for so many reasons. And once we've been able to sell it as that, then the government needs to get on board, right? Like more people buy tickets to arts events and sporting events now, but sporting events are funded through the roof. Why is that? Is it because we haven't communicated it properly? I don't know.
I think that we need to make sure that we don't silo the arts. We need to understand that the arts is all of our culture, that it's not just this little thing that some people go to on the weekends, that, you know, the stories that we're telling in our theatres and our books and our films are stories that are important, homelessness or mental health or, you know, refugees, climate change. Our theatres are tackling these stories. We're trying to change people's lives, we're trying to open minds. So if we go to the government and say, please can we have some pennies for the arts, it's kind of pushing it over there. Whereas if we try to have everybody understand that this is affecting all of every aspect of our lives, perhaps there could be an opening up. But I think regards to the media, I think the government has expected that the media takes care of itself and that all of the big mastheads or the commercial outlets, they fund the media, the storytelling. But if they're starting to withdraw from that, we need new ways of funding this kind of storytelling.
Okay, over here.
Just a quick question, because it might be a bit chicken or the egg, I'm not sure. I work in PR for indie theatre mostly, and there's a big perception that it's not cool and it's for, you know, theatres for the blue-haired old biddies who have nothing better to do and they don't have jobs, they're not busy, and they're, you know, that's all it's made for. And so there's this perception I have that either we've created a space where coverage is less because interest is less, but I'm not sure if that's true because, as Steph was saying, there's more attendance at live performance than there is at sport. So is it a matter of less coverage because of less interest, or is it less interest because there's less coverage because there is this odd perception that things like sport are more valuable and accessible to Australia?
Or is it that there's less coverage, not because there's less interest, but because the coverage doesn't exist the way that you recognise it anymore?
Yeah.
Like the coverage is
Irrelevant.
what Kate was saying. It is in the Facebook recommendations or in those little, I don't know whether that's...
If you take, I realise there's no one here from this particular publication to defend it, but if you take the Daily Telegraph, you've got one arts page on a Thursday and there's 20 sport pages every day. And they even had a TV ad campaign last year that profiled and supported their sports writers. That would have cost them a lot of money. To think that even Fairfax would do that for the arts is laughable. I hate to say it. So there is this enforced view that it's not worth anybody's time or money, and I don't know what we do about that.
I mean, to address that partly, I know the Daily Telegraph is a sponsor of the National Rugby League, so there is a sponsorship arrangement which does explain. So someone is paying for it, you know. So it's a question of who pays. And so the company is claiming it as a sponsorship deal. Therefore, they employ more people to it's essentially sponsored content.
So that's a model that could work. Like if the books industry got together and sponsored the section in The Guardian.
Absolutely.
I think of it, radio's been doing it for 100 years. Like I cut my teeth, my first 10 years of my career was in radio, which I think if anyone's worked in media, radio is the hardest place to work in the whole entire world because it's live. And if somebody wants to kill you, they will kill you live on air. And I worked at 2GB, which was a baptism of fire, for 4 amazing years of my life in a senior executive role as the only female. Tick. And I had a really good time. But what did come out of that I didn't know existed from a media perspective was that they had been doing what was called the news talk format, and they did it first with this guy called John Brennan, who brought it from the States. And he is an amazing man, and he talked about having really great hard-hitting topics that he could then go and take to sponsors and say, buy this. So he actually effectively brought the first sponsored content to this market in the 50s. Fast forward to the early 2000s when I was working there, and we were selling off portions of shows. So we were saying at 7 o'clock in prime time, you can have from 7 o'clock to the Pips of the News at 25 past or 7:15, and it needs to be book content. So we had book publishers. We had Hachette, we had New Holland Publishing, buying full block spots for critical reviews of books. We had we had a hose guy who had hoses who used to buy like a half-hour block on a Saturday morning for X amount of dollars, and it was, you know, advertorial, but his hoses were good. And we used to have clients. I used to have clients that used to ring the station. I was a marketing director, really like young, lovely marketing director that had come from Nova. So I was cool and hip and went downstairs to 2GB and went, oh my God, what happened to me? And quite literally, I was getting calls from advertisers saying, can you tell the traffic girls to stop the show, we've run out of product. I had never heard of that ever happening in my life, in my career. And I was there for 4 years, and I think mainly because I was so intrigued by the recommendation model of a human to another human, talking to someone in their lounge room or at their kitchen table, and yes, they're the retiring grey nomads, but talking to my nana, and my nana would come over and say, Alan Jones, he was talking about Paint Away the other day. I'd got me some. I'm like, you can't afford it. It's $159. She's got 2 boxes though, because Alan told her to buy it. And anecdotally though, recommendations, whether you're old or young, that is something. And I would say, you know, to your particular question, and also to yours earlier about the books, I would say that perhaps the arts model or the arts, you know, journalism businesses or the businesses that you guys are working for at the moment probably haven't quite got their advertiser model correct, because there could be a lot of ways where you don't have to sell your soul to the devil to Macca's or to the Rugby League, but you could be doing some really great deals with book publishers to have some really amazing critical review, or to theatre companies that could band together their marketing resource over the course of 12 months and have a theatre page that goes out in the Daily Telly or in Fairfax. I'd perhaps say it's just not maybe as well organised as sport.
I agree with you, but I also think that that's sort of comes to another issue, is that a lot of the big shows, the big musicals, the STC, the opera, the ballet, they get coverage. And as Alyssa was saying, without...
They buy ads.
They buy ads. And I represent a lot of the indie theatre sector.
They also have like board members who like own the papers and stuff.
And they also just from my little pump, they also tour nationally, which
Exactly. So it's just that kind of thing where you're banding together.
Independent spirit will never die, my friend. I say rally the troops.
Yeah.
It's really hard to actually get people to support each other because everybody's so too...
That's the value of like...
She's going to start a website.
That's the value of this kind of thing, exactly. That's the value of like very art-centric publications.
And something hyper-local. If something was hyper-local, we can give the smallest indie show the same amount of space as that big musical because we value them the same. It's a democratizing of that kind of thing.
It would work. I don't know if it would work if you did it as an Australian publication, but I feel like making it Sydney-focused makes sense. Yeah.
Just to democratise, I've got three hands that were up, so just go over here first.
Speaking to the point about broken financial models for arts media, and being in a sector that, this might be death by baptism, a sector that pushes for innovation but at the same time is severely risk adverse because of the resources they do have. The business trend is a push towards social enterprise. So what do you see as the future of arts business if we actually look to the role of social enterprises playing in engaging young people in what they care about?
Can you give some examples?
Yeah, can you give us a concrete example?
I own one.
Yeah, tell us.
It's called State of the Arts Media. We're a specialist arts publication covering regional New South Wales and Western Sydney, because a lot of the major publications ignore those areas. Yeah. And our social impact is because we actually use our audiences, so young people, to write the content they want to read about those productions.
Mm-hmm. So that's a word of mouth, personal recommendation kind of model?
At the moment, yes. We've been around since technically 12 months, but we went live in December last year. And I feel like you're my spirit animal tonight because all the points you were making, Kate, about how the data that you can get from being a digital platform, our readers and what they're engaged with and how they're engaged with changes from month to month. And they're producing the content for us. And so to actually look at how business trends are changing and the fact that organisations that have grossly been overlooked by mainstream publications are craving some sort of attention for what they're doing, I think there's a lot of gaps that social enterprise fills in the very value-based business rather than it being a purely commercial-based business.
Oh, you are so many of my audience. I love you, but I sometimes don't know what to do with you. So social enterprise is such a noble cause, but I sit there and go, how are you going to pay your fucking rent?
Yeah.
Like, I love you, and I just wholeheartedly want to cuddle you and say, yes, I believe in you. But I also know that it's, you know, if everybody created a social enterprise in every hub of the world, you know, championing in every part of whether it's arts or industry or science or technology or anything, nothing would A, ever get done. B, everything would be all over the place. You would have no central point or so no central notion for, you know, valuable insight or being able to move with things. But you're also not looking after yourselves. You know, like we've just come off this research project, and you know, the generation that we present, you know, Snackable to are the first generation that will grow up not longing, yearning, or ever thinking. So they are 13 to 17-year-olds that they're going to buy a house. They're the first lot. So they're the first generation ever since the wars not to go, I'm going to own a house. They're not even going to own an apartment. They don't care. They're not going to own a car. They share everything. Everything is shared. There is not even an iTunes library. They just share Spotify's. So that you don't own anything. So this world of social evolution is something that I'm dealing with from an entertainment and content perspective, going, if you're all these social, amazing social animals, like how do we both provide you with engaging content that you will think is really interesting, but also how do we provide you with the best path for, you know, career longevity? Because running a social enterprise, I would argue, is probably not going to A, make you any money, and B, not get you to the next evolution of where you want to be.
I think there's a bonding conversation over alcohol very soon.
Yes.
That sounds like such sad news for you.
I know it's good, but I go, how are you going to do this?
Lex, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a quick one about the difference between arts criticism and arts promotion, which I feel like has maybe got a bit lost today. Maybe that's just because we're at a stage where we feel like we need to promote the arts so much that we don't have room for that sort of critical debate. But it worries me when we start talking about always paying for promotion as opposed to, you know, paying for a critical space, partly because the type of art that I really like to see and foster isn't the sort of work that will always end up being pushed to the top of a promotion barrel. And, you know, sometimes criticism is the best way forward for really difficult, complex, challenging art.
I think the best publicists that I work with are the ones that understand that you might get a 2-star review, but you've also got the most engaging piece of writing that really engaged with the work, and that's what we try to do. And the publicists that really irk me are the ones that say in an email something along the lines of, oh, can you just help us get the word out about this? And it's like, that's not my job though. That's somebody's job, but it's not mine. And I think that does, and we do lose it, because I think, I don't know how to say this without it sounding too cynical, but I think that where I'm working, which is not an art-centric publication, and in that industry of art-centric publications, I'm the arts arm of a news organisation, which is always going to be news first. Among the arts journalists that I talk to, there's this idea that we're there for the arts industry, and what gets lost often is the reality that we're actually there for the audience. We're there for the readers of the newspaper. And that's why criticism can be really vital. That's for the audience. It's not for the industry. You're not promoting something for the industry. So yeah, really good point.
I feel the same way, totally focused on the audience or / readers, but that's why I want to write, because I'm an interviewer, so I write preview stories rather than reviews. I really want to tell people, this thing is on, you should go, and here's this amazing artist talking about their work. It's not me talking about it. It's an interview with this choreographer who's really trying to do extraordinary things, and if you hear what they say, you might consider going, but then you might also wait for the review to get that personal recommendation, or is it any good, because everyone's only got so much money. But I still think there is value in telling stories about the stories for the audience, and you could call it promotion, or you can call it storytelling, or you can call it journalism, but I think we're on the same page with that, yeah.
And there is still a very big role of arts journalism, which is essentially taste making, like to do that role as well. So,
Down the front.
more or less a rephrasing of that. Just that I think at least every show I work on, even like a musical project, whatever, we're relying less on arts journalism as well. But like we come to accept that it's not a thing. But like if we get it, it's kind of like a bonus. Like a preview and that in interview is much more helpful for us to get, as you're saying, to explain what our kind of thoughts are. Reviews are less helpful to get more people to come, but they're kind of morale boosting. As you said, how we use them, is that the problem? Like the music industry went through a huge revolution of journalism once it's easier to access the music than it was the reviews. Like, what's the point of that? I don't know, I guess that's me talking as an artist as opposed to...
So do you value it still, like, are you waiting for a story or a review as a record of your work, that because work can be very ephemeral and you want to, you know, keep something of it, or that it gets it out to your audience? Like, what is the value for you?
Well, I guess that's what's been cloudy about it over the past, say, 5 to 10 years or so. It's just like what we actually tend to use it for is more to like, it's more value to us to promote us as broader artists as opposed to individual projects, something like that. Yeah. I think, anyway, I'm not sure if that helps you at all, or us really. Like, I'm sure for us it's like a dying model as well. Like, us relying on you less means that you rely on us less than we all die.
Yeah, and I think the value of arts criticism has always had these debates attached to it, and I think it always comes down in favour of, well, the job of an arts critic is to take record of progression in the arts and what is happening in the arts, because the arts is one way that communicates what's happening in society at large, right? So then it's got this really broad, important thing, but at the end of the day, yeah, there's people making theatre who are like, I could take it or leave it. Like,
yeah.
I'd argue your point's really valid about the music industry, though. Like, we work extraordinarily closely with the music industry, not just at Snackable, but with the other companies. And my husband's ex-record label for 20-odd years. And I would argue that their, lightning bulb moment that they missed is probably one that the arts as a whole hasn't actually received. So their lightning bulb moment was everything went digital and holy shit, here's iTunes. And they missed it. Blink, you miss it, and they didn't catch up. And to be fair, they've really not caught up ever since. And that's had a knock-on effect to journalism, to how things are portrayed, how they choose, winners of bloody competitions, the singing things on television, which are horrible, right the way through to how they now market, popular music, which is, we would get offered from music PR, I would say in surplus of 50 artists every 2 to 3 days, locally and internationally, for anything we would like to do, an interview or this, because we're seen as a tastemaker platform for young people. So therefore, please, what would you like to do with, this band or that band or this person? So I would argue that, perhaps the arts broadly and arts journalism didn't receive the lightning bulb of the iTunes moment, which then turned into the Spotify moment, which then turned into the holy shit, we're almost irrelevant moment. And I would argue that just because it's not coming like an iceberg doesn't mean it's not an iceberg.
particularly in Australia, because I think the iceberg for the arts, for the local arts, is a bigger iceberg here than it is in America, whereas in music we got to just follow them, what they did in America with music industry. In Australia, you've got the most spread out country where, the publications are based in the major cities. Art's happening all around the country, and we actually have a very unique situation here that we need to solve ourselves instead of waiting for the US to do it, so that we can just follow them through it.
Are there any other burning... okay, go to the front.
Advertising, do you think the giants like Facebook and Google have anything to do with shrinking newsrooms? Because ad revenue, digital and print's both down, everyone's spending money with Facebook and Google, someone's spending money with the mastheads anymore. Do you think they're responsible for that as well?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, for instance, in my organisation, we can track Facebook and we can correlate it against ticket purchasing patterns. So we know if we've got various promoted content that we've got that's related to a show that we've got, and then over the next 5 days, if there's a spike in ticket sales, we know that content produced engagement that was successful in converting those people who looked at it into ticket buyers. I think that's the future of much more clued-in organisations than ours are already doing that at a much higher level.
We have a dark social guy. What even is that? Like, we legitimately have a dark social
Is that
guy.
his title?
Yeah, like, he's our dark social dude, and you don't give out his number. Like, legitimately, you don't give out his number, and he, like, tricks the algorithms in the back of the Facebooks, on the interwebs, in the dark net. Like, it's mental, and we can see spikes that are for, you know, 2 and 3 grand what I wasn't getting when I was spending 50. So legitimately tricking algorithms into putting you into other spheres and groups, like, this shit is real. Like, you can't have it all up on a publicly, you know, technology-driven domain that smart people that can code can crack and manipulate, and then expect it not to be manipulated, regardless of whether it's about the newsrooms, regardless about whether it's fake news or selling stories or dark social guys. Like, this is legitimately part of the future that we are going into as digital, you know, digital humans. You know, we're asking for it, they're just providing
exactly.
it. So I would say, you know, in our very parochial market called Australia, you know, we've got Woolies and Coles, and then what upset the apple cart when Audi came in? You know, is there an Audi coming for a Google and a Facebook? I'd argue there has to be. You can't just have 2 people running the world. It's not going to work. And there are really smart people that can go in and crack codes, and they can shut down institutions. They've shut down hospitals. They're shutting down libraries. They're demonstrating by force that they can actually shut stuff down. So that means that you have to be very careful in terms of, like, risk profiling, which means that governments around the world won't allow there to be just 2 providers of digital assets. They can't allow it.
Did you have a follow-up question over there?
I did. I was just wondering, we're talking about all these arts industries funding, helping to fund arts criticism, but I'm actually doing a program on arts criticism for ABC Radio National at the moment, and one of the things that I've discovered is music journalists in particular say that as a result of music industry paying for the space in the particular street press and so on, he constantly gets censored if he writes a critical review.
Yeah.
So there's this, how do you address that danger?
Well, that is the big danger, right? And I mean, when I used to edit street press, that was 100%. It was like, you wouldn't, I mean, we fought against it, but particularly when I started, and I'm sure it still happens, like, you wouldn't get a cover if you didn't buy the big ad, and you had to spend the most money to get the cover, and that was what got you the cover. And it was the editor's job to fight the publisher and say, no, this band is deserving. And it was so rare that that would ever get across the line.
And this person constantly has reviews cut.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, The Guardian has a very, very strict line on that. I mean, I said before, we don't do that kind of, oh, someone pays $200,000. We do. We have a whole other section of that, but it's not something that I do, and I have nothing to do with it. And we don't have, sorry?
You're not privy to this.
No, and I don't, it's like a different part of the business, and it's a different part of the publication as well, and it's a valid part, but it's not something that I have any part in. But we have a very, very strict line where we can't actually do that thing where, oh, the Australian Ballet is advertising, so we need to review the show. We are in a luxurious position, though, because we're funded philanthropically and by different organisations. We're not reliant on advertising funding, and that's why we get to do it. What's your experience at Fairfax? Have you ever, with those commercial stories you write, do you feel like you can write negatively on those wraparounds?
I don't write negative. I don't come in to a situation thinking I'm going to write negatively about this. Do you know what I mean? It's more like I'm going to look at the art. I'm going to talk to experts about it, and I'm going to write a pretty flat story about this is the art. It's on. This is what the experts say. I don't sort of colour it with my own persuasive, nor do I make it negative or whatever. I will leave with those commercial wraps. I will leave the reviewing to our art critic who will review it. And it's so fascinating because the last few that I've done, John MacDonald has slammed the show. Yeah. Absolutely slaughtered it. And the Art Gallery of New South Wales paid a ton of money for that lovely wraparound, perhaps even anticipating that they might get a negative review from John MacDonald.
But no doubt there is somebody in the sales team that got an angry phone call about that.
Yeah, look, angry phone calls happen. And I think this kind of funding model is very parallel to the advertising model, that people pay tons of money in advertising and they kind of expect to get something for it, and if they don't get something for it, there will be an angry phone call, or if they get a negative review, there will be angry phone calls. There always are. So whether you've put your money into advertising or put it into sponsorship or put it into membership, it's the same tension. It's the same tension.
People still want something from that money.
People still want something, and I just think that, I mean, the Fairfax way is if you just deal with that angry phone call and you go, terribly sorry you feel about that, but we stand by our critic. You just deal with it. Deal with the hose it down, and I think, and then we all carry on. But I feel like it's the same in a way that the industries have to grow up a little bit and be able to wear a negative review if it comes, because if we wrote non-stop positive reviews, the readers won't trust us. We have to have trust that you won't trust a 5-star review if you didn't say that the bad one was bad. That there has to be trust there, and if we again stay focused on what do the audiences want or what do the readers get out of it, then we can go, okay, I'm going to wear that negative review. I probably even knew it wasn't that good, and you know, let's see what our next show does. I think the arts industry can handle the fact that some shows don't work.
Some can handle that, others blacklist reviewers. So.
Correct, and maybe you need to step back from that company a little bit, like when you're ready to come back, you know, let's talk again.
Let's talk again like grown-ups.
Let's be grown-ups.
I see that there are burning questions, but we probably should wrap up. There is an opportunity to have a drink, to talk to our panellists more, to talk to each other more. I see there is cheese, alcohol, and we have about 20 minutes before we get booted out of the building unceremoniously. Thank you so much to all our speakers. Thank you so much for all of you for your contributions. Please stay, please talk, and please continue to support arts journalism.